Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center is one of the two federally funded parent training and information centers that serves the state of Illinois. We work with families, including infants, toddlers, children, and young adults with disabilities, anywhere between the ages of 0 and 26. We're here to help parents to effectively learn information about their students' special education or accommodations needed at school and their role in special education. Please remember that Family Matters is unable to offer CEUs for training participants. You can, of course, request a certificate of completion by contacting the trainer via email after the presentation. Family Matters is not a legal service. We do not provide you with legal advice or representation in any way, nor should any information that we share with you be considered legal advice, despite the topic that we're discussing today. We do like the PowerPoint today and the presentation are developed or facilitated under a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, but please do not misconstrue that that means we are endorsed by the federal government. The webinar is being recorded today, and the recording will be available on the Family Matters website following the presentation. Please use the chat box at this time to state your name and the title of the organization you're affiliated with, or if you are a parent or individual with a disability. Please make sure you use the Q&A box for questions. They're very easily missed within the chat, and I would hate to miss anybody's question that's in the chat box. That's happened already this series. So please make sure those are being put in the Q&A. They will be addressed after the presentation is finished, if we still have time. Otherwise, we will try to send some emails out. Please help us by completing that survey after the presentation today. That will help us to ensure we are providing you with quality material. And a copy of the presentation slides were emailed out to you yesterday, but also they are available in the chat. I put the link to the Google Drive there. So please remember that Family Matters is first and foremost an educational hotline. I'm sure you just heard the phone ringing in the background. We're here to help parents understand their role in special education. We also hold the state's grant to train educational surrogate parents to serve students within the state of Illinois who are within the care of DCFS and require special education services. So in order to become an ESP, you first have to take a training with myself, and you are then assigned students on your caseload. So the state is always needing educational surrogate parents. We currently have over 900 students within the state in need of a surrogate and only 275 trained individuals. So if you're interested, answer your emails that I send you once a week asking you to become an educational surrogate parent. Once a year, we hold our COMPASS program. COMPASS stands for Coaching Others and Mentoring Parents About School Services. It's a 10-week series. This year, it will be self-directed under Google Classroom to help you understand more about advocacy and participating in IEP meetings. Carrie just finished the DAISY data collection educational program. The link to that can be found on our website, and you can do that via Google Classroom if you missed the live. We do lots of special education advocacy trainings like this one. And we are fortunate to have two self-advocates who post monthly vlogs for us. Both of those are on our website for September. We also send out a quarterly newsletter and a transition news blast. And both of those can help you understand more about your role in special education. And of course, last but not least, our monthly podcast. Family Matters employs only two of us, full-time educational support coaches, myself over here on the left, and Carrie. So we're who you talk to when you call. All right, so at this time, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Christina. Are you excited, Christina?
Very.
All right.
One of my favorite things to do is to teach self-advocacy tips. So this is genuinely the best way for me to spend a Friday afternoon. So thank you for letting me do this. Okay, so can you see the slides okay?
We are seeing it perfectly.
Awesome. All right, so like Abby said, my name is Christina. I am a staff attorney with Equip for Equality, and I am going to talk about Equip for Equality a little bit. Maybe. Got it. So Equip for Equality, we are a nonprofit based here in Illinois. We cover the entire state. We are what's known as Illinois' Protection and Advocacy Agency. Under federal law, every state is required to have a nonprofit that is designated by the governor as the protection and advocacy agency to provide legal advocacy services to people with disabilities. So we exist in all the states. Actually, before I was here, I was in California working for their protection and advocacy agency. But here in Illinois, our protection and advocacy agency has been around for since 1985. I'm not going to do the math on that because it's really close to my birth age and I don't want to think about it right now. But our current president is our founder. So she's been around doing this and she's amazing. So our job is to advance the human and civil rights of people with disabilities in Illinois. We serve as kind of a watchdog as well to make sure that anyone providing services to people with disabilities are following the law. Most importantly, when we work with our clients, all of our services are free. We provide pro bono services. We're able to do this based on a variety of grant funding and donations that we get, which is wonderful. We have several different teams. You've got my team. We are a small but mighty team of 13. We are with the special education clinic. We also have our civil rights team. They do things like employment, accessibility, civil rights of people with mental illness. So we really run the gamut. So the other thing, if you take nothing away from this, one, Equip for Equality provides free support, and two, we have no income limitations and no immigration barriers. So we can work with, lawful permanent residents. We can work with refugees and asylum seekers. We can work with undocumented people. Immigration does not matter. This is a list of the services that we provide. We do our best to help everybody, but because we are a small and mighty team, we provide a variety of different services, all the way from self-advocacy, stuff like this, where I teach you how to be your own best advocate, and all the way up to representation at IEPs, sometimes just negotiating back and forth with the school. We also do some work with the juvenile system and kids involved in the juvenile system. And then there's going to be a slide at the end of the presentation, if you haven't looked already, that's going to have all of our contact information if you want to reach out to us. So let's just big picture. You guys have been talking about dispute resolution for a couple weeks now, but I want to just remind us all what the purpose of special education is. And that's to make sure kids with disabilities have access to a FAPE, a free, appropriate public education. And that prepares them for future education, employment, and independent living. And then we have this really handy chart that goes over all the different kind of the different resolution options, and it looks at them actually sort of from the least time-consuming and invasive all the way down to the big mediations and due process and administrative complaints. But these are some of the different dispute resolution options that are available to you. And remember, starting with that IEP is always a really, really good idea, because you get things in writing and that can get the ball rolling for dispute resolution. So when we're talking about dispute resolution, we're talking about resolving issues, disagreements between you and the school. So because the school is not respecting your child's rights or not upholding your child's rights, and these are some of the rights that kids have. They have the right to be safe from bullying. Kids with IEPs and 504 plans have the right to go on field trips and be included to the extent that they are able. So having the supports and services that they need to be able to go on field trips that they are, eligible to go on, getting to play and learn with their typically developing classmates, get those services they need so they can access that free, appropriate, and public education, and to not be unfairly punished because of their disabilities. So those are some of the rights we're going to keep in our mind as we talk about dispute resolution with the school. So I'm going to start first with administrative state complaints. And I think administrative state complaints can be a good option, and it can be an option that might be less stressful. because it's a little less invasive. Um, it's a little less intense, but it does give you the opportunity to, if you've gotten to a point where you can't resolve things with the school through an IEP, this is a way to get the state involved and say, hey, I don't think my district is following the law or the regulations, and I need you to take a look and let me know what you think. So a state complaint goes to ISB, that's the Illinois State Board of Education. When you file a state complaint, what you're saying is the district isn't following the law regarding special education, and you need to file a state complaint within 1 year of the incident happening. So let's say one reason you might want to file a state complaint is maybe because there's something in your child's IEP that's not being provided or not being enforced. Maybe you asked the school for an IEP and they just ignored your requests and never granted it. You have to file your complaint within 1 year of that action happening. It can be a little tricky when it's like a ongoing issue that's spanning several months. So usually you're going to pick a date that's kind of at the end of that as you've been trying to do that resolution. If you have questions about whether or not you're filing on time, you can always call our helpline, and one of our attorneys or pro bono partners or our wonderful interns will help answer that question for you. ISB has a form that you're going to use. I have some screenshots of the form so that you can, see it as I explain it, and you'll be able to hopefully remember when you're looking at it for yourself. And the complaint includes all of the information that the state needs to know. So information about the child or the children, the facts leading up to the dispute. So what happened? And you'll notice it says children or child. There can be systemic complaints. So if there's something happening at school and it's happening to multiple students, a complaint can actually be filed on behalf of multiple students with those students and their families' consent. So sometimes organizations will file systemic complaints when they see things happening with their clients. Or it is perfectly fine to just use it to file about a complaint about one child. Big thing to keep in mind is that there is no appeal from a state complaint. So once ISB has issued its decision, there's no right to take that to a higher authority to ask them to overturn that decision. The decision stands. But the good thing is that filing a state complaint does not stop you from also doing mediation and also filing for due process. They can be done on parallel paths. Often they are. So even though there's no appeal, you still have the right to access some of those other dispute resolution options. Okay, so we're going to file a state complaint. The most important thing is that you have proof that supports your claims. You need to have documentation that supports what you're saying, so that it's not just, it doesn't read like just a list of reasons you're mad at the school. You want to show ISB, because remember, ISB knows nothing. They don't know anything about your situation. They don't know anything about your child. You are educating them about all of this by filing the complaint. So you want to make sure you're gathering documentation. So what kind of documentation? So let's imagine that we have requested an IEP. And if you request an IEP, the school has to respond within 10 days to get that scheduled, or say, no, we don't think one needs to be held. And it has to be held within 30 days. So let's say you send an email to whoever your contact is at the school. Maybe it's the special ed director. Maybe you have maybe it's the principal. It really depends on your district. But let's say you sent the request by email. Always send requests in writing. Email is preferred because you get the time and date stamp. You sent an email and you said, I want to hold an IEP for my child to discuss getting him a one-to-one aid. And they don't respond. 10 days goes by, you haven't heard anything, you send a follow-up email. Still hearing nothing, you call, and the school is just sort of dodging things. So what documentation are we going to submit? We're going to submit that record of all of our emails to the school, saying, hey, I want to hold an IEP and I want to hold an IEP for this reason. A lot of the time, parents have conversations with schools via phone. And, that can make things much easier when you're like communicating with the teacher. How did Susie do at school today? Oh, she did okay, but I wanted to tell you about this issue. Sometimes it's just easier to have that phone conversation. But if you are having a conversation where something is agreed to, or something really meaty is discussed, send a follow-up email. So you call and talk to the principal about requesting an IEP and the fact that your child hasn't been getting all of their speech and language minutes. After you get off the phone, you're going to go and you're going to write an email. You're going to say, hey, Mr. Principal, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. We discussed XYZ. I understand that XYZ is about to happen. If I've understood incorrectly, please let me know. And by doing that, you've put the issue in writing. You've got a time and date stamp because it is an email, and you're giving them the opportunity to respond and say, no, you're wrong. And then you have all of that conversation documented. So that's sort of a side tip that I give to all of the parents that I work with. Just if you're talking on the phone, follow up with an email. So once you file your complaint, ISB has 60 school days to complete their investigation. And afterwards, they'll issue a letter explaining their findings. They will also likely call you and touch base once your complaint has been assigned to somebody. And they will just kind of, let you know that your complaint has been assigned. They might ask you some questions. And that is all very normal. When you do file a complaint, you send it to ISB, and there's information on the form about where you send it to, but you also have to send a copy to the school district because the school district has the right to respond to your complaint. So you send it to ISB, you send it to the school district, and then the school district is going to be given the opportunity to respond. And you're going to get a copy of that response as well. And I believe there will also be an opportunity if you need to respond to the school's response, you'll be given that opportunity as well. So what are some reasons why I might want to file a state complaint? Some common issues are like the district isn't providing a nurse and your child's IEP says they have to have one. Recently, I dealt with this with a client of mine. I have a client who has epilepsy and needs somebody there to keep an eye and make sure that the seizure plan is enacted when and if he does have seizures. And this is not something that can be done by an aide. This is something that per the IEP, per the doctor, it needs to be a nurse or a trained nursing professional to be there to watch the child to make sure if the child does have a seizure that the seizure action plan is immediately put into place. So district is providing an aide but not a nurse. You say, hey, I really need this to be a nurse, the IEP says, and if you don't get any movement, a state complaint might be a good option to have ISB come in, look at the situation and say, you guys got to hire a nurse. We just talked about requesting IEP meetings and being ignored. Your child might have like a behavior intervention plan, or a BIP, but the school is not following the BIP. the school isn't following the different steps that you're supposed to take when you see that behavior starting. Um, and part of the law is that you have to implement the IEP completely, and that includes the behavior plan, and that includes following the steps of the behavior plan and not just skipping to something like suspending the child, or restraint, or removing the child from the environment. Another one, maybe your child is being denied FAPE because they're getting removed from the learning environment a lot to go to like a sensory room or refocus room or cool down room. Lots of schools have different names for it. But if you're constantly spending time in that room, you're not accessing your education. And there's probably something else going on that maybe we need to take another look at the IEP. And so if the school's not, willing to reevaluate the IEP because your child is being constantly removed because of their behaviors, then it might be a time to file a state complaint. One note I did want to make here is that there is actually a separate complaint form for restraint and timeout issues. I put a link to the form there here in the slides. If you have a restraint issue where you feel like your child is being improperly restrained, or restraint is being used when it shouldn't be, please feel free to give us a call and we can talk through that with you. That can be a very sensitive, a very emotionally charged issue. So we are here to kind of try to help support you in drafting that complaint and guiding you along that path. So this checklist, I want to say that I did this. I want to say I put together this checklist. But as soon as you see the complaint form, you're going to know it's not true, because I totally copied and pasted that directly out of the complaint form that ISB has. And I did that because this is something that ISB gives you that's really, really helpful. So this is literally a list of every single thing your complaint has to contain in order to satisfy ISB. And basically all it requires you to do is just make sure that you're filling out every relevant box that pertains to you. Don't leave anything empty unless it's something that just doesn't pertain to your issue. So you provide all of contact information for you and the student, the name of the school, the name of the district. You want to provide as much detailed information as you can, and you get to provide a proposed solution. And I'll give you some examples of some possible solutions when we go over the form. But you get the opportunity to say, this is how I think the issue should be resolved. Again, remember, no later than 1 year from the occurrence of the violation. So there is, a year can be a long time, but that year goes by fast. So if you're thinking about a state complaint, you want to start that's one of those reasons you want to get the IEP called, start talking about the issues, start getting things documented and trying to work it out with the school, kind of building that record till you get to a point where you need to rely on those dispute resolution options. And then again, you have to provide a copy of the complaint to the school after you file it with ISB. So this is the top portion of the form. So the first page, the form is like, I think 5 or 6 pages long. Most of the form is just information about how to file, what the investigation process is like. So I do recommend taking the time to read through the actual form, because it does contain some really good, helpful information. It's not really written at what we call plain language level, which I think that's what we should be endeavoring to do with all of these public forms, is to make sure they're written in a way that's simple and accessible to everybody. So if you're looking at this and you're thinking, this is so much, like I just don't know where to start, again, you can reach out to us and we can help you sort of navigate and figure out where would be a good place to start. These here under that first section that says state complaint investigation, it links you to all of the relevant special education laws and regulations, both here in Illinois and the federal regulation or the federal law. Federal and state law are pretty similar because we get special education law from the federal government. So the special education law covers the whole country. It applies to everyone equally. And the state, Illinois, takes those laws and says, okay, we're gonna take the federal law and we're gonna put it into our state law just to make sure everybody's clear. So they're very, very similar. If you need the actual, or if you need or want the actual law that you feel the school is not following, that you want to be able to cite, you can find them here. You can also talk to an advocate. You can talk to us about if you want to be able to cite that law. I will tell you, not every parent and every complaint cites the actual law, and that's okay. What you want to make sure you're doing is making sure you're very, very clear that there has been a violation. I don't think, I know ISB doesn't expect parents to be legal experts and be able to cite, 34 CFR section 300.151. I don't even know what that is. But they don't expect you to write your complaint like you're a scholarly legal professional. So don't feel like you have to know exactly what law it is. If you do want to know, again, they're linked right there, or you can, talk to somebody who's familiar with the law. You can give us a call and we can answer your questions. So on page 4, this is where the actual complaint itself starts. So you get 3 whole pages of information before you ever get to the actual complaint. So this is what it looks like. This is the top of it. You'll see it looks kind of just like any basic form. And like I said, you want to make sure you're filling this out as completely as possible. Try not to leave anything blank. If you do leave anything blank, it's just because it's not relevant. I think this is page 5 of the complaint, but this is where you get into the real meat and bones of your complaint. You will notice that when it asks here by these little green stars, it asks for, the descriptions and details, and there's nobody is going to fit the subject and the dates and the sequence of events in that tiny little box. It's just not possible. So you can absolutely use extra pages if you need to. Just write in that box, please see attached, and they'll know to go look at that other page. One little piece of advice up here in red, you want to be as specific with dates as possible. So when you notice an issue start to happen, it might be a good idea to just kind of keep a log of like when you talk to people, when you tried to, when you had an IEP meeting, just so you kind of have that at a glance. If you can't remember that it was, September 27th of, 2022 or whatever, get as close as possible. So you want to do like it occurred in October of 2023, or it occurred the week of, I can't remember what the first day of this week was, whatever the first day of this week was. So it was the week of September 24th, let's say. I'm probably wrong. But you want to get as close as possible because it's going to help the investigators a lot. Now, when you're going through the description of the alleged violation and supporting facts, this is going to be the meatiest part of your complaint. This is where you're going to talk about what happened, when it happened, and why you think it's a violation of your child's rights. So what my advice, the way, and I'm going to tell you how I, as a lawyer, write these complaints. And because I think it's something that kind of works universally. So when I take on a complaint, or sometimes I ghostwrite complaints for parents, the first thing I do is I write myself an outline. And the first thing is introductory facts. And this is where I'm going to tell the story. And then I'm gonna make headings that say specifically what the issue is. So, you know, IEP says nurse is needed, nurse is not being provided. And I'm gonna write every issue that I want to make sure that complaint covers. I'm going to write it in little headlines. I'm basically, what I'm doing is I'm just outlining it. And I'm putting, like, under the facts section, I'm putting, you know, general information about the student. I'm putting things that have already happened. I'm including dates. And, you know, if you can just sort of plunk ideas places, it makes it a lot easier to make it cohesive, make it, you know, make it easy to read. Do not feel like you need to write like a lawyer. Legalese is super obnoxious. And a lot of lawyers are actually trying to get away from that big flowery language. We all like to feel very, very smart. But remember, ISB is investigating a lot of these. They're seeing a lot of these. So you want to hit them with the highlights. You want to make sure, you know, try and go back to, if you can, try to remember what you learned in like middle school, high school about writing an essay. Truly and honestly, that is what I go back to when I do writing like this. The more concise, the better. It can be really helpful to have another person read through it after you've written it, because what your instinct is going to be is to lay out everything that has ever happened and give all the detail and all the grievances and all of the pain. And you know, there's nothing particularly wrong with that, but you want to make sure that what you want them to know is crystal clear. My son's IEP says he needs a nurse because he has seizures. My son has an aide that is not a nurse. I have asked for a nurse, and then kind of outline, I first asked here, we talked about it at this IEP, and make sure you also, when you reference like IEP meetings, make sure you're including the IEP as supporting documentation. So this is where you're going to spend a lot of your time drafting. And like I said, it's good, you know, if it's your co-parent, you have read it for you, a colleague. You can also use an advocate. I have gone through drafts of my clients' complaints. It's actually something I really enjoy because I get to see my clients in action, really advocating for themselves, and that's really neat to me. And so basically, I come in and I just pad it with the law, and I make sure everything is logical, in a logical order, and making sure that the words and the feeling behind it are yours as the parent. But it's always good to have another person take a look at it. And then, like I said, you're going to get an opportunity to propose resolutions. So one of those things might be, you know, please hold the IEP meeting I've been asking for. I have, in some complaints that I have written, requested staff be retrained in restraint techniques. I recently asked for staff to be in a complaint, asked for staff to be provided with bias training and how to be anti-racist. You can also ask for compensatory education. Compensatory education is not the school giving you money. Compensatory education is, my child had these services, you did not provide them with the services. Please, pay for or provide us with those additional services. So if your child was supposed to be receiving speech and language and they did not, you're going to say, my child missed, maybe 40 hours of speech and language services. I want those 40 hours of speech and language services to be made up. And I want additional services to make sure we catch him up for whatever services he missed. Those are just examples. It really depends on your situation and what you're hoping for. And that, again, this can be a place where it can be very helpful to talk to somebody who's, knowledgeable in special education, just to see what might be an option of something to ask for. And then this is the bottom of that last page of the complaint. I wanted to include this because, one, you've got the little star here. You want to also outline, what attempts have you made? You need to have made some attempts to resolve the situation before you get to the point where you file a complaint. But once you've gotten to that place, you want to say, I called on this day, I didn't get an answer. I emailed and I didn't get an answer. We had an IEP meeting and they said they're not going to provide a nurse, even though it's in the IEP. You want to outline those steps so ISB knows, okay, they've already tried this and this and this, so that's not going to be something we can use to fix it. So that also, just think about, you're talking to a total stranger and you want a total stranger to understand what has happened. And then down here at the bottom, it tells you exactly where you need to send it. I recommend sending it via email to their email here. That seems to be the easiest way to make sure the information gets there. Okay, so I'm going to jump into due process hearings, and I'm going to make sure we have time for questions. Due process hearings, I have been a lawyer for 10 years. I have been in many different kinds of courtrooms. I have been in many different kinds of hearings, including due process hearings. I am a lawyer who does not like hearings because I don't think that they're always the best use of time, and they're so incredibly stressful on my clients. Due process hearings are very, very stressful, but they are necessary sometimes. And we're seeing a growing need to have an impartial outsider come in, look at these cases, and help us make a decision. So due process hearing is like a mini trial. It's going to be you in the school. I mean, just think about any sort of, think about the last episode of Law and Order you saw. Both sides present evidence. Both sides make arguments to a judge, and then the judge decides based on those arguments what's going to happen. The judge in this situation isn't like a black robe judge. They're called impartial hearing officers, and they are individuals who have been appointed by ISB. Some of them are lawyers, not all of them are, but they all have some experience working with special education law. They can be held by Zoom. But they can also be held in person at like the district offices. I've seen a lot of them recently held via Zoom, which you want to make sure, if you're doing it via Zoom, make sure you only have the information pertinent to your case in front of you if and when you testify. So if you're giving evidence, like if you're speaking on your own behalf, giving testimony in your due process hearing, you are limited to what's in front of you. So unlike mediation, the school has to go to due process. It's just like any sort of, it's just like if you decided to sue your neighbor because they cut down a tree on your property, um, your neighbor doesn't get the choice of whether or not to go to court. You have filed a lawsuit, you're suing them, they have to go. Schools can also file for due process against you. Um, for instance, if you request an independent education evaluation and they don't think it's necessary, they may take you to due process to resolve that. There is a process where a child can be removed from the school setting for 45 days to an IAES placement. So it's a 45-day placement. In that case, if for some reason you do not agree with that placement, the school may go to due process to make sure the child is placed in this 45-day placement. Again, unlike a lawsuit in court because you got rear-ended, the hearing officer cannot order the school to pay you money. They can order the school to give you compensatory education services. So they can order the school to provide you with X number of speech language therapy, X number of OT. Oh goodness, it's very, very windy. And of course I have all the windows open. So yeah, so the hearing officer can't order the school to pay you money like pain and suffering, but they can order the school to evaluate your child, to provide a service, or to provide a specific amount of compensatory education services. So why would you even file for due process? You just heard me, a lawyer, tell you how very, very stressful it is. Why would you want to do it in the first place? Because it gives you an opportunity to be heard. And, if all other options have not worked, then, this is your option. And so if the school is not you don't agree with how the school is implementing your child's IEP or how they're helping them, those are when you're going to file for due process. So for instance, a big one is if you've requested an evaluation to get special education services and the school says, no, we're not going to evaluate, that could be a reason you might want to go to due process. Or if they do evaluate and they say, oh, we've evaluated and we've decided they're not eligible, that might also be a reason. Your child isn't being taught the way their IEP says. So if there's a specific reading program your IEP says your child is supposed to use and they're not using that, then that may be a reason to file for due process. Another big one is challenging a change in placement. So for instance, as you probably know, if you've made it here, that your child has the right to learn in the least restrictive environment for them. And so that means the goal of special education is always to have our kids learning with their same aged peers, and getting those services in that general education classroom to the extent that that's possible. And of course, some of our kids need a little extra support, and that's okay. They might need to be at a therapeutic day school. But for instance, if you think your kid is making progress and is ready to go back to the general education setting and the school is saying no, 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 that might be a time to file for due process and say, my child is not in the least restrictive environment. So if they're not providing it if you've asked for like OT services or speech and language evaluation and they just refuse, that might also be a reason. Or for instance, if they're trying to graduate your child and you don't think your child is ready for graduation, or they're not meeting the goals and grade requirements to graduate, and you want to stop the school from graduating them too early. How do I file for due process? So state complaints, got to file them within a year. In due process, you have 2 years. There's a 2-year statute of limitations that you have to file for due process within that time. You send the due process notice to the school district, and you're also going to send a copy to ISB. And there's a form, there's a form for everything, but there's a form on ISB's website, And I linked it right there. We're going to go over it in a minute. And just make sure you triple check all the necessary information that's in there, because you don't want to miss an issue. So like I mentioned with the state complaints, it really helps to outline what you want to make sure you include when you file the due process complaint notice. So the due process form, again, you just want to make sure it's completely filled out, but this is the information your due process complaint has to have. When you're talking about that what the problem is, be very, very specific. And there might be like multiple facets to your problem. Like, let's say you've requested more speech and language hours, and then you've also requested different methodology of speech to be taught to your child. So those are going to be two separate issues that you're going to talk about. And you want to be as specific as possible. Remember, the hearing officer doesn't know you and they don't know your child. So you're telling them your story. And that's the goal of any of this, of due process, of state complaints. You are trying to tell your child's story. You want to make sure you have to have documentation for due process. You really need expert support. So like a doctor or an evaluator who can come in from an expert position and say, this is something this child needs. So this is the top of the form for due process hearings. Again, looks kind of just like any form, but make sure you are filling it out as completely as possible. And in an area of where like there might not be something relevant there, a fax number, most people don't have their own fax numbers anymore. So that's one of those things that won't be relevant that you can leave blank. This is the bottom of the form. You're definitely going to use additional pages. There's just no way on earth that you're going to get it all into that teeny tiny little box. And then I just made some notes. I talked about them a little bit earlier, but just kind of some notes about describing the dispute and what resolution you're asking for. So after you file, there are certain timelines that the school has to follow. The school sends it to ISB within 5 days after you send it to them. Even though you've already sent it to ISB, the school is also required to make sure ISB gets it. They have 10 days to respond. You'll get a hearing officer assigned within 3 days. There's a resolution session that takes place where you try to resolve things. And then there's the hearing timeline. So there's 2 different timelines we're working with. And I have a chart with the timeline at the end that's going to be a lot easier to read than what's here on the slide. These are, I won't go through every single one of these, but as you are thinking about filing for due process, these are the things that you need to be as successful as possible. We can't ever guarantee that you're going to win, but here are the most important. Here are some things that really improve your chances. Records and experts. That's what you need. That's 2 of the biggest things. So an expert who can come in and testify, this is what the child needs. They do not need to be in this very restrictive environment. They can be served in the general education environment. Whatever the issue is, having an expert, it could be a doctor, it could be a therapist, and you can have more than one for sure come in and they will be a witness for you. Practice before you go into a due process hearing. It's a very stressful environment, and practicing and keeping good notes is going to help keep you focused. If you win, the hearing officer issues a ruling and they will say you have to do these things, and sometimes they will give the school, they usually give the school a deadline. You have to hold an IEP by this date. But they're going to issue a written finding, and at the end of that finding is going to be what what the school has to provide you. If you lose, you do have the right to appeal. You will actually appeal into either federal or state court. In this situation, you are most definitely going to want a lawyer. We very, very, very rarely do these appeals because we try really hard to work towards dispute resolution that doesn't involve due process. But definitely, if you're considering appealing a due process decision, I think it's definitely worth a consideration of retaining an attorney to help you. So this is timeline I mentioned. And this talks about the 30-day resolution time period, when everybody gets appointed, and when the 45-day due process timeline begins. So if you cannot come to any resolution within 30 days, then we go into the due process hearing timeline. And that's 45 days. So basically, the due process time period begins, and the hearing has to be held. The hearing has to be held, and the decision has to be issued within those 45 days. It very rarely is. Most of the time, there's going to be a lot of continuances to make sure everybody is prepared. I included some tips here. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but again, just a good reference point for you. Again, think of due process as your last resort. Definitely go to mediation. I always recommend going to mediation or resolution session before due process. Even if the school doesn't agree to it, you should do it, because you should at least say, I'm willing, because it shows the hearing officer that, look, I'm trying to do everything I can to avoid using all of my time and resources to do this hearing. And it shows that the school is not trying to cooperate by doing this. So always start with something like mediation, a state facilitated IEP meeting. I've been through a couple of those. They actually can be really helpful, but try doing those things first before going to due process. Be specific. You can have multiple issues. Break your complaint into headings, just like we talked about with the state complaint. And then just a note on stay put. So remember, in an IEP meeting where there's a change in services happening, most of the time we see this with like changes in placement, but you have 10 school days from the IEP meeting where the change is made to invoke stay put, or say, I want the IEP as it is currently to stay. I don't want anything to change. And then you would file for mediation or due process, or both. And this is all you need to do. Just send a email that says, I'm invoking my child's right to stay put in the IEP. So the new IEP doesn't go into effect. Just keep that in your mind, because it can be a really short timeline. It can catch up with you really quickly. So you want to always be thinking about stay put when you're thinking about conflict resolution in an IEP meeting. Okay, I feel like I just threw a lot of information at you, and I hope it made sense. But this is all of our contact information. You've got my contact information right there on top. You also have our special education helpline. I think this is always a really good place to start. It is staffed by my colleagues, our pro bono partners, and our interns, who are all brilliant. Or if you're more of an internet person, we do have an online intake form that you can fill it out with as much detail as possible, and that can help our conversation go a lot quicker and a lot more to the point when we talk. But those are all options available to you to reach out to Equip for Equality.
Okay.
Do we have questions?
Yeah, at this time we'll stop the recording.